So why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. My name is Joe Minarik. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Databank.
Okay, so for people who don't know, I'm sure everybody knows who Databank is, but headquartered in Dallas.
Yep, it's a data center company headquartered in Dallas. They've got the largest geographic footprint in the Americas and basically in the U.S.
Sure.
Across 26 plus geographies and 65 plus sites.
And then do you cover outside the United States yourself personally, or do you have a counterpart that manages like a
Yeah, we're just predominantly in the U.S. We have one data center in the U.K., but Databank's focused on the U.S. market.
Very cool. All right. So where are you originally from?
Originally, I'm from Michigan.
What part?
A little town called Flushing, just outside of Flint, Michigan.
Okay. So
central, an hour north of Detroit.
But obviously that puts your family in the automotive industry probably?
No, we were farmers, actually. So
Really?
We farmed about 2,000 acres, cash crops, corn, oat, wheat, soybeans.
Really?
So I grew up working
Second
on the farm.
generation, third generation?
Let's see. It was probably about third generation. My dad would been. So my great-grandfather on my dad's side came over from Czechoslovakia.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so they kind of started in a small community and built farmland around them and kind of worked that way.
So they migrated to Michigan after the wars, and they got a couple thousand acres, and they started growing everything.
Yeah, we kind of leased some of that. Some of it we owned, and some of it we leased from others and worked for them.
Sure.
But yeah, so as a kid, I was
still have the family farm. Is it still? In the
it's with my uncle now. You know, as the kids grew up, we realized we don't like farming. It's too much work.
You're in the complete opposite industry of where it sounds like it started for you. Then from farming to the most advanced technology industry in the world, right?
Yeah.
So how did you get there? That's the question.
It's kind of a little bit of a wild story. As a kid, I always loved electronics and trying to figure things out. I'm kind of a problem solver at heart.
So were you an only child?
No, I'm the oldest of 6.
Oldest of 6. That's it? Just 6?
Just 6. My aunt had 10.
All right. So they're committed.
We had a neighbor that had like 22.
No kidding. That's in Michigan, huh?
Growing around, yeah.
So there must be something in that water up there. But at an early age, were you an athlete?
No, I never had the opportunity to do sports. I was
farming?
It was farming. So get up in the morning before school, go work on the farm, go home directly after school to go work on the farm. So didn't have that much of an opportunity, but I was pretty athletic as a kid. We'd like to goof around and play around, and, we'd be running around in the fields. And the nice thing about growing up out there is that big open space. I had a little mini bike and motorcycle and bicycles, and we'd try to build our own go-karts or whatever and just run around in the fields and drive all over. So it was cool. I was driving a pickup truck around the farm when I was like 5, 6 years old.
Yeah.
Following the equipment to go pick up my dad. We'd take the tractor in, then he'd throw me in the tractor to work the field, and he'd take the pickup home to go get another tractor and work somewhere else.
Isn't that bananas to think of? Like back in those days, even young kids were, that's advanced technology back in those days. And you were able to operate at an early age, it sounds like.
Yeah. And as the farm equipment progressed, they started to build electronics into the tractors and little computer systems. So like the best example is when you're planting seeds in the ground. It was a mechanical device that when the seeds would kind of go through a drum and it would kind of click every so often, you'd set it like every 6 inches or 5 inches or whatever it would be, and the depth. And so it would click through it and kind of control it. Well, as that become computer operated in the future, and they'd have all kinds of whiz bang things to be able to control that equipment more precisely and better. And my grandfather would look at that thing and throw me the manual and go, "Hey, I don't know how to run this thing." He goes, he would know what he wanted. I didn't know what to design it for, right? I'm like, I don't know what the seed depth needs to be, but he would. So he'd say, "Hey, I want these parameters. Joe, go figure it out." So I'd be reading the manual and I'd figure out how to program that stuff. And so that kind of got me excited about a nerd, right? Into the computer stuff and to manage that. Now I loved reading books, so I'd read books all the time. And I probably shouldn't say this, but my family started nicknaming me Brains because I would read the books on it, but they're like, "Brains, you don't have any common sense." But I'd back the truck into another truck that was directly behind it because I couldn't see it in the mirrors, right? So I'd do stupid stuff like that.
Give us with one hand and take it with the other. You have a big fat brain for that, but the common sense stuff.
Yeah, so I had to learn that much over time growing up. But it got me, really excited about the electronic stuff. And then, when it came time to graduate, I was like, I should probably go to college. But nobody in my family had ever gone to college, so they didn't really know what it was. And my dad was like, "Well, that's expensive, and why do you want to go to college?" And I'm like, "I want to learn about this computer stuff," right? And so at that time, computer science was just beginning to come out in universities.
Mid-'80s probably, late 80s.
Yep. And so we're like, well, what's that going to mean? So, after a bunch of things I didn't even know about colleges, I had applied to a bunch of different ones. Wayne State in Detroit was the #1 computer science college at the time.
Wayne State.
And I thought thought, oh, that was great. So I applied there. And then my dad, actually, as a part-time gig, he had flying. He used to fly crop dusters, fly under power lines and spray fields. Then he kind of graduated and was doing air charter services. And then he ended up flying corporate executives around in jets. So kind of a weird progression for him. He's always an entrepreneur on his side. And so he would talk to some of those executives. Hey, my son's thinking about going to college. Where should he go? And they're like, oh, MIT, you should apply there. And oh, University of Michigan, right there, where you're at. So I applied to both of those too. So there's only 3 schools I applied to at the time. And I got accepted to all 3.
Did you kid?
Yeah.
You got accepted
and
to
so,
MIT?
yeah. So, but I didn't know anything about MIT. I didn't know what it was. At the time, it was just a school. And so ended up... because we were farmers and we were a pretty poor family. I got a full ride at University of Michigan to go there through financial aid packages and stuff like that. I had to do a work study program, so I had to work full time while I was going to school. But they guaranteed me a job and a salary and stuff to help pay for school. And so I picked University of Michigan because I would have to pay out of state at MIT, and it was going to be expensive. But I didn't even know what I was passing on, or at the time, hindsight's 20 years later. But at the time, University of Michigan had computer science, college, and so I was like, oh, I'll take that. But it was brand new, and they didn't know where to do it. So you had the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, the LSA, and you had the College of Engineering, and they didn't know which college to put it in. So they put it in LSA, but they made all the requirements equal to engineering. So you had to meet both.
Oh, nice.
And so I had to do all these, foreign language and, history and all these other credits to meet the Literature, Science, and Arts college. And then I had to do physics and computer programming and all this other stuff for engineering. Oh, man, that workload killed me. Like, it sucked. Sure. And so, but I made it through. And then basically from there, when I was there, one of my work study programs was to maintain the computer systems for the math and sciences departments. And Sun Microsystems was just coming out back then. So they had the Sun 360s and stuff like that. And the math department got them. So they sent my boss to California to get trained as a sysadmin. And then he came back and trained me. And then I was managing all these Sun Microsystems computers as a sysadmin before we even had sysadmins. And so when I was graduating, trying to find a job back in '89, technology was just terrible.
In Michigan?
Yeah. Couldn't find anything. And so they had this college career day where they'd have a table like this and like 100 different companies sitting there. And you'd kind of walk around the room and you could pick one, they'd talk to you and interview you. And then they would send you a letter, hey, we'd like to make you an offer, or they would say a rejection letter. So all of us and kind of, friends and stuff, we'd go back and we'd get these FOADs. It was F off and die letters. Basically, we'd get these rejections. And so we'd paper them on our walls. And it became a contest of who could have the most, right? Because you interview with so many different companies and it was not hiring back then.
Sure.
And I finally got 2 offers, one from Hyatt Regency to be a sysadmin for Sun Microsystems for their systems in Chicago. And the other one was National Semiconductor based out of California. Again, being a sysadmin. And so I was like, I'm kind of tired of Michigan. How can I get the farthest away from there I can?
Sure.
And so California sounded cool.
Which part of California?
It was in Sunnyvale.
Okay.
Sunnyvale, California. It's in the Bay Area.
Yep.
And so I went there and became a sysadmin and learned everything I could about managing Sun Microsystem computers, networks, and just kind of digested it to a point where I was actually starting to manage all of it. But I was at an electrical engineering company, and I didn't have an electrical engineering degree. So I was not going to progress my career at all.
Sure.
So I was like, how do I progress my career? So after 4 years of there, I was like, started to bounce around, try to figure out where to go. I went to a startup, my first startup, and it went under like 9 months later. And so I got to learn that really fast.
Late 80s?
This is early 90s? This is late, early 90s.
Early 90s.
So it was about 94.
Yep.
And then I went to a company called Dialog. And they were converting from mainframes to Sun Microsystems, and they had a Cisco network, and they needed someone to help set it all up. So I went there to set it up. And one of the guys I'd hired as a sysadmin, after being there a couple of years, he went to this company called Excite.com. And he's like, oh, Joe, this is the greatest thing of where they're doing and what they're building out. This is when, at the time, AOL was the big dog with old dial-up.
Yeah.
And, aging myself tremendously here.
I remember those days. A lot of us remember those days.
And so I was, so I was like talking to him, and he finally kind of convinced me to go over and talk to Excite. So the runner-ups were Yahoo and Excite, and I think it was Webcrawler at the time, and there's a couple others. And so I went to Excite and interviewed and ended up running some of their operations and network, and just kind of grew with the company. Back then it was all T1s and DS3s, and bringing lines on. And man, if you had a 10 meg connection, you were big, and we were bringing those in. And we're trying to keep servers up. So we're building these little server rooms. We're in Market Street downtown in San Jose, near the exchange there for that connectivity, and trying to run servers. We had servers overheat, catch on fire. We got fans and everything. We took all the fans and blew all the heat from our cage into the cage next door, and that cage overheated. So that poor guy was, frustrated. But, that was only
the early days,
10 racks of stuff, right? But that was huge back then, right? So very, very early days, and stuff was keeling over. So you kind of met other people in the industry. We talked to the guys behind the scenes at Yahoo or others, and like, hey, our server's keeling over. HTTP daemons just can't handle the load. We're running out of memory. Like, what are you guys doing? How do you optimize your kernel on your system? So a lot of that, and just kind of learned, and was there for a few years and went all the way through up to the 2000s when the dot-com bust happened and everything imploded, and then kind of jumped startup, go under, startup, go under, startup, go under. And then I got really frustrated, and I'm like, I need a company that's going to stay alive. So Disney, I interviewed at Disney, and it brought me up to Seattle. And so I ended up running their internet operations group for a short period of time. Disney's a very cool
Why
company.
Seattle? Just curious.
Oh, so back in that day, they had a lot of the major companies and then .com were trying to figure out how to, brick and mortar companies, so we're trying to, how do I get online? And so what they were doing is gobbling up little web development companies out there and bringing them online. And I think it was Starwave was based out of Seattle, and Disney acquired Starwave to help build their online system. So since Starwave was based in Seattle, they moved all of their internet technology aspects into Seattle. So that's how it grew there. And so with Disney, when I was managing their operations group, it was, ABC.com, and they were just starting to bring online voting and stuff in then, and try to figure that out. ESPN was there. Then you had Parks and Resorts, and then you had down in LA was the studios and a lot of their animation and development work. So some of the Disney online stuff was based out of there. So I'd travel just about every month. I'd fly to New York to visit with ABC, drop down to Bristol, Connecticut for ESPN, hit over to Orlando for Parks and Resorts, hit LA, Burbank basically for the other stuff, and then come back up to Seattle and the teams. And it was really cool kind of what they were doing and trying to figure out that online stuff. And they were hungry to kind of build that stability in. But at the end of the day, Disney is a movie company, and the backstabbing aspects of a movie company at the executive level was evident. And I was like, wow, I just can't play this political game. I'm not about politics. I'm about technology. I want to develop. And I was doing really well at that stuff, but the back end politics, people wanted your team or taking your team out, and you'd have meetings about how you take someone else's team out and get their responsibilities. I'm like, I don't play that game.
Yeah.
So I talked to a friend of mine, and he was at Amazon at the time, and said, hey, you should throw your hat in at Amazon. Give me your resume. I'll submit it. Man, I submitted in my resume. They gave me a call in about a week. They called me on like a Friday and said, hey, we want to schedule some interviews. Can you be available on Monday? I said, sure. So I did a phone screen on Monday. They said, oh, we want you back for a second one. Great. So I did a second phone screen on Wednesday. Then I did it in person on Friday. And the following Monday, they gave me a job offer.
No,
it was really fast.
What year was this? Probably
this
early
was
2000s?
2005.
Yeah,
2005.
Because their website was 11 years old by then. They really built the internet, it seems like.
It was all, an online selling place. People still thought of them as only selling books, right? So it was funny whenever I'd go out and try to meet with, later when AWS started, I brought them into, my goal was to bring them into different countries. So I'd go into different countries, find data centers, look at the infrastructure, meet with the government, do negotiations for incentives and all of that stuff. And they were like, oh, it's a book company, right? This Amazon book company is coming in. How big is the book company? And
because
like,
it's a bookstore.
It did. So, but that perception was still there, and they didn't understand anything about cloud. But so kind of grew with them. And as I was kind of mentioning earlier, when I was there, they brought me in to manage the networking team, but the guy that's bringing me in is like, look, I really want you to manage North American operations, but we got to kind of grow this. You got to give me some time. I'll set you up that way. It'll be okay. Like, trust me. And I'm like, okay, we'll try this. But he delivered. And, I think I did a good job of delivering on my side. So they kind of moved me into those positions. I was managing it. And then AWS was starting behind the scenes. And they kind of tapped me over and said, hey, look, you've been negotiating our bandwidth contracts and some of our data center stuff. You know that really well. we really need kind of a business development mindset that really understands infrastructure, but understands the business needs too, to help us go into different countries. We're going to start this AWS thing. At the time, retail was centered in Virginia, and they had just launched Europe. They just built it out when I was coming on board. They were just starting to. It was Project Goldcrest at the time. So they're like, we don't need Europe because we're going to ride on top of the retail footprint, but we don't have anything in Asia. So, hey, we want you to get on a plane and go figure it out. And I'd never been to Asia. And I'm like, can I go to Europe?
Yeah.
I can't even read the signs in Asia. Like, how am I going to get around? They're like, you'll figure it out.
Anywhere in particular, by the way?
Nope. They're just like, we got to figure out Asia. We want to go in Asia.
Like, go to Japan, go to China.
So they had a product manager. His name was Jake Anderson. And so him and I sat down and we discussed a lot of that. Well, where would we go? We could go to India. We could go to Japan. We could go, all over the place. We kind of looked at every country and kind of were trying to make a determination. Where do we want to go?
Based on connectivity, based on latency,
so
based on
at the time,
capacity?
Yes, a lot of that would come into play. But the first thing is where the customer is going to be.
Like for the customer being the eyeball content?
No. So AWS is compute at the time. So they just launched, when they first launched, they launched S3, which was storage. And so it was, it was kind of online storage. You could sign up for storage. And that was kind of going gangbusters. And they were just trying to get compute off the ground. EC2 was just coming into play. And what we're finding is startups were using it like crazy because you didn't have the capital expense of a data center and all of that stuff. You could put it as an OpEx. You didn't have to go raise money to go buy all of this capital out there. And as people know, data centers are expensive, right? It's expensive to build all that out and then all the servers and then maintain it in a skill set that's just not compatible with the innovation you're trying to bring for whatever product you're bringing online. So with AWS growing all of that, we're like, well, where's those customers going to be? So we talked a lot about Japan in those days, but Japan was very conservative culturally, very large scale enterprise type businesses. And enterprise wasn't ready to move to the cloud back then.
Yeah.
So we're like, Japan just isn't going to work. There isn't a lot of startups and innovation in Japan, right, at that time. And so, India was like, oh, that's all about startups and innovation and what they're doing. But their infrastructure was terrible. Like it was just really bad. And so we're like, we can't even build a data center there. It just wouldn't even survive. So after a bunch of deliberations and figuring it out, and I was traveling there, going to data center conferences and picking people's brains and just trying to understand stuff, I had an epiphany. Southeast Asia was actually trying to be a startup. They were trying to catch up to the rest of the world in technology. So they were just starting to build out, exchange hubs, data centers, and they were hungry. And so we kind of stepped back and I'm like, oh, Southeast Asia is a startup. Like if that whole mindset is startup and our customers are startup, Jake and I kind of bantered this back and forth and we're like, we should go Southeast Asia.
Like what's Southeast Asia? Is that like Singapore?
So that's when we said, okay, now where? Yeah. And then you look at Vietnam and Taiwan and all these areas, they don't have any infrastructure. So the only two places that had viable infrastructure, predominantly connectivity, was Hong Kong and Singapore. And so that's where we're kind of like, well, which one do we go? So I flew to Hong Kong, reviewed all the infrastructure. Hong Kong was expensive. Very expensive.
For power-wise?
Power and connectivity. Fiber and connectivity, plus property values. So we were looking at, can we build our own data center or can we lease it? And we were kind of using a formula at the time. If you had about 300 racks was kind of the break even for us. If we'd rent a colo, if it was under 300 racks, and if it was over, we'd build our own.
Okay, because it penciled out better.
Better for scale, right? To manage that CapEx. So we're looking at, how much land would cost. And I'm like, wow, Hong Kong's expensive. So then I'm going, let's go check out Singapore. Singapore is also expensive. But then we're talking to the government and they were excited about bringing Amazon there, but they didn't understand the cloud concept. They knew this was a book retailer.
Yeah.
And Singapore's a logistics hub. So they're all about logistics. And so they're like, oh, Amazon retail, we need logistics. That's a great synergy for Singapore. So they offer us incentives. We're like, no, it's not. It's not that. They didn't care. They're like, just bring the name in. So they gave us some incentives to help us get started there. They're excited to bring the name in. It was a little less expensive and it had a great internet connectivity that spread out to the rest of Asia from out of Singapore. So we're like, all right, we're going to do Singapore. So that was our first foray into Singapore. And then I had to hunt down data centers and what we were going to do and fiber and network connectivity.
Was there a fairly strong number of wholesalers that were there by now? I'm sure digital was there. No?
No, not at that time. There wasn't a lot there.
Really?
There wasn't a lot there, and it was all small data centers. I mean, at that time, we were deploying like 30 racks.
I remember those days too.
They're running at 5 kVA, right?
Yeah,
that was a big deployment.
Yeah,
that was a big deployment back then. Amazon's design is they wanted 3. So what they would do is this is a cool thing that they did back in the retail days. They'd operate, and they figured out that if you're operating in 2 data centers, you want redundancy. You basically need to have 100%. So if one data center goes down, it'll fit there. But if you have 3, I can drop it down to 60%. Because then I can spread an extra 30 across of it, right? And so it was much more cost effective to do that. And if you went to 4, you basically had a 33% redundancy down to a 25%. Your drop was small.
Yeah.
But 50 to 20 to 33 was pretty big. So it was a kind of a sweet spot to operate in 3, so they'd run redundancy. And they would actually have an outage. They'd schedule something that, hey, turn the data center off. I want you to turn the cooling off. We're going to send out an alert. We're going to power that data center down. And retail was trying to build all of their applications to be resilient, so we'd power it down. Like you'd be live and running, and boom, that data center would come down offline. And then we'd have an outage call to see who failed over and who didn't operate. And then those executives that had those products had to go sit in front of Jeff Bezos and explain why their products failed over, because they were supposed to be designing for that redundancy, and they'd get their butts handed to them on this or that. And we're like, this is the coolest thing. We get to turn a data center off. Well, when they started AWS, they wanted to do the same thing, but then they realized customers weren't building redundancy into what they put online. They just use one availability zone. So Amazon's design was to build 3. So they built 3 so the customer could do that, because that was their mindset, to build that high availability. So when I went out there, in every country I'd go into, I had to find 3 data centers that had, far apart distances. We'd have to look at earthquake, environmental hazards, resiliency,
flooding, yeah,
all of that, to make sure that they were isolated. I didn't want an event that would take 2 offline. It could take 1 and we'd fail over.
Yeah.
Man, I could always find 2. The 3rd data center was always a pain in the butt. Always. Man, it was crazy. It was so hard to find that. In every country I'd gone into.
Really?
And all of them.
Would
that
you go,
3rd one was always a problem.
So how did you solve for that? Did you just go become the anchor for someone on
We'd become an anchor for someone, or we'd, when we started getting more to scale, we'd start building our own, then I'd find land and do that. We'd always find some small little data center that might be out there that we could go use, but man, they were constrained. Yeah. Always constrained. And we're like, well, we're going to kick that can down the road. And then sure enough, about 2 years later, it'd bite us in the butt. And we'd have to figure out where we're going to go capacity to continue to expand that.
Yeah.
Everybody was kind of getting yelled at. How did you set us up there? Well, you knew at the time, right? Like,
yeah. That there would be limited. I mean, I think that no one anticipated how fast this would scale and what the iterative increments would look like.
Oh my gosh, it grew so fast. It was a surprise to everybody.
But even like AWS, did they see it coming?
They kind of planned on some fast growth, but it still, I think, exceeded any expectations they had. It grew so fast, and we were in a constant scramble to keep up. We were always running, on danger in our side, in our minds, of running out of capacity, running to the limit. And how do we deploy more servers and more racks and get more power and find sites? And at the time, it wasn't so much getting power. Connectivity we'd figure out. Over time, we could start building our own connectivity. We learned how to exercise that muscle. We started to learn how to acquire land and build our own data centers so we could do that. We'd work with power companies to make sure it was available, because sometimes if you're really far away from a connection, then it would take them months to build it out, or a year, and that was too long. We needed stuff like within 3 months, right? So we'd learn how to do that. So for us, it was just how fast can we build? It was all the physical constraints of building that was slowing us down.
What was the typical critical path, though? Was it labor? Was it supply chain on the equipment? And if it was equipment, was it IT or MEP?
Well, you'd always have some long lead equipment. It was always a long time to get generators in and things like that. But it was pretty stable. Like, you knew what it was. Permitting was always a big variable. You never knew what you could do and what would take you sideways. And then power, again, like you said, it could be completely variable in where it was. So we had to be really good at starting to find land that had power close by.
Yeah.
And then it was just pure construction timeline. It's, it's a physical thing. Concrete can only dry so fast. And this used to be an argument we'd have internally. Got to go faster. And, the guys running construction would be like, but I can't make concrete dry faster. Like, I got a physical limitation in this aspect. Well, what can we do? Can we modularize this? Can we use the same pieces over and over? And, and as we moved to the data center design, it became more and more efficient just because it was, cheaper to run that way. So you could start purpose building efficiency and cooling and power utilization, again and again, because you're using the same systems internally all the time.
And they knew what they were building for, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. You knew those servers and the type of infrastructure you're building for, so you could lay all the servers out the right way. That's all purpose built. So you could be super efficient, and then you started getting faster at it. And they got really good and cheap and fast at building, a highly resilient data center specifically for their needs.
I saw, was it April 1st, AWS did a press release, Bloomberg, that talked about how they're going to spend $150 billion in the next 10 years. I think it is 15 billion. It could have been 15 years, so 10 billion annualized, but regardless, they're going to be spending a ton. And in that article, they talk about how they had actually spent less, last year than they had in the previous year, right? Because they are, someone had told me this, and maybe you know the answer to this better than I would. If you were to add number 2 and number 3 together in cloud, they still wouldn't be big enough to eat.
I don't know if that's still true today, because I'm just, I haven't been a part of Amazon for the last couple of years. But it was true for a very, very long time that if you added the top 2 to 3 together, they were still not as large as Amazon in the cloud.
Well, both those two other comps, the number 2 and 3 in cloud, really, they spent they spent 50% more this year than they did the previous year, because they were really investing so much into AI, right? So you have a cloud war that is David versus Goliath, and then you have an AI war that's just a completely different monster now, right? But let's go, because there's a lot of things that you talked about. I mean, I'm going to go back and scratch the paint on things from colleges, because I'd like to talk about, I like to think that labor and power, or power and people, are the 2 greatest existential threats to the industry, right?
Yeah.
You're on the ops side, so you have to deal with both those problems.
Yes. Yep.
Right? So let's talk a little bit more, though, about, I want people to understand a little bit more about you before we get into those subjects, right?
Sure.
So you were at Amazon for how long?
16 and a half years.
So you were just getting started, right? So I can imagine how that's probably not even the same company. It's probably you were at 4 different companies in 16 years.
Yeah, it changed a lot over the years in that growth and how fast they grew and how we thought about stuff and how we scaled. I knock on wood. I was super fortunate to be part of Excite at the beginning of the .com, and really part of the early days of the internet, and like meeting with Cisco and defining what a load balancer was, right? And with companies, like, we were telling them what we needed, and we'd have prototypes in, and kind of I got to work and be part of, behind the scenes of how that was. And I was like, that felt really cool to be part of it. And then I got lucky with AWS and it starting and be part of the next kind of wave of innovation in the cloud.
I think, to put it into context, like, someone was telling me AWS is it 200 or 300,000 people, right? And to put it into context, that's like almost the same size as a branch of the military.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon itself, I think, they have a lot of people in their retail and warehouses, right? To do that. But I think at the time, Amazon was 30 or 40,000 people when I started in 2005. And most, I'd say 80% of that was probably in the warehouses. The rest was in the technology area. And when I left Amazon, they had 1.5 million people.
Yeah, see?
Like that just boom.
So that's how explosive they are. So real quick, did you ever have to work with Jeff, or did you have to?
In the very early days, I got to meet with him, and we were presenting kind of, some of how the data centers operated, and because to him they were a cost.
Yeah.
Why? How do I get these costs? And he would be mad that, we would have all this capacity for peak. So during, Christmas was coming up and the holidays, retail would go ballistic. We'd run everything to the edge, and then in January, it'd go down, and we were at 25% of our capacity. And so he's like, I got all this stuff sitting idle. He goes, doesn't Intuit need it for tax day? Like, and I think that was kind of some of the impetus that started getting him thinking about how do I sell this,
productizing the cloud,
and getting AWS going. And so, when AWS managed that, then we could manage all of that capacity going on. So through those early days, it was meeting a lot with Jeff on kind of, one, on the data centers and why they cost so much and what we're doing about it. But two, as AWS developed, like what countries we're going into, what was the revenue stream, how the customers grow. So we'd sit into some of those, and then so Jeff's cash flow was he would sell stuff on the retail site, but he would work it so that they didn't have to pay that back until like it sold 7 times, right? Like they could churn through products 7 times and then use the money from the first one to pay the next one. Yeah. So he had this cash flow cycle and this flywheel effect going where he could maintain a cash flow. Now we go throw a data center in the middle of that, but it's just all CapEx, and that's boom, we suck all his cash out.
Yeah.
So he was like really concerned about where is this cash going and what's the return going to be and how we're going to maintain that if we suck all the cash from retail. So it was we're always kind of looking at how to be cost effective and manage that effectively in the infrastructure as it was built out. And so, and how much it was going to cost us to go into a country. And, you could basically say that you had the cost of the data center, and then you had to fill it with all the servers and racks. Well, the servers and racks cost about the same amount as the data center.
I thought all built out. I always would tell people, I worked at HP for a bit, and when we'd be designing, the space, power, and cooling, the void to be filled with that technology, they're like, the pull-through rate is like 1 to 10. For every dollar we spend on the infrastructure of the facility, it's $10 worth of IT that fills that void. So I always thought it was like, if we're spending $50 million on a data center to build it, we're putting $500 million worth of IT inside that facility. But I mean, the metrics shift so much, especially now when you look at the price of racks for AI racks. I mean, like people are. I don't think a lot of people understand what it takes to support the infrastructure they need. And when I say infrastructure, I mean everybody that's listening to this is a consumer of technology throughout multiple different applications throughout the day. All that technology aggregates back into
the data center,
into one utility, which is the data center, right? So we're trying to shine a big bright light on that, and you're helping me with this conversation actually. But when you left AWS after 16 and a half years, it sounds like, and where did you head off to next?
So that's where I went to where I'm at today, is Databank.
Okay.
So they're a colo provider serving the industry. I was at AWS a long time, and actually, I didn't need to go anywhere. I loved what I was doing. I loved the people and the innovation that was continually happening, and to operate at that scale is just unbelievable, right? Just the things you would see break, you just never see in a normal course of business.
Yeah.
So you had to get creative and look for those failures and figure out how to continue to manage that. And going into, I was part of bringing them pretty much into every country they're in today, right? Or my team was. So I grew the team over time and managing that. But at that time, when I left, but we were moving to the edge, right? So at the time, Amazon runs these big clusters of data centers, and they're getting huge, and you had to start thinking about how do we push compute more to the edge, and you have all these devices, and latency was a big thing. So they were kind of thinking about how building more of a distributed environment. So I was meeting with a lot of CEOs and data center companies to say, hey, I need to build to the edge because it wasn't there. I need a starting footprint of a couple megawatts, right? And it wouldn't grow large because we knew we'd build the central large and then distribute it on the edge. And I meet with all these CEOs, and they wouldn't crack it. Why would we do that? You guys are growing big in Virginia. We're going to build more there. And we're like, no, but I need it in Arizona, and I need it in Nevada, and these places. And Raul, who's a CEO of Databank, met with him, and he was the first CEO that understood what we were trying to do and why, and the edge and the concept. And we hit it off really well. And we were talking and going through all of that. So I really respected him. And next thing you know, he's kind of saying, hey, you should come work for us, come build this for us. And I was like, I'm not really interested. I'm good. But started thinking about it more. And I'm like, wow, I've been part of AWS, and we pushed the industry in a massive number of ways, right? As an example, I'll sidetrack just a bit, like renewable energies, right? We need them. Everybody's talking about it today. Amazon was one of the largest purchasers of renewable energy in the world, right? And they subsidized renewable energy everywhere. One, because it was cost effective for them to do so, to manage energy into all the data center footprints they did, and they wanted to manage efficiently and get, make it cost effective for them. But we wouldn't be pushing the renewable stuff today if it wasn't for them. and Microsoft following suit, and these other guys really pushing the renewable side. They have a massive impact on making that happen. And so it was even things like that we were contributing in and changing the world about what we were doing. And so, but AWS is one view. Amazon's one view and one area to push for their agenda, right? And what they want. And it's fine. It's their business. They should.
They are I mean, they're massive,
so they're going to push for what's going to help them. They want to save money and do it cost effectively and all of these things. They're not out to destroy anything. Like they want to do it
changing the
right.
industry, though.
But yeah, they are. Absolutely.
They're changing the way that people make purchasing decisions as well, because they're changing their fixed form factor or whatever their standardization is that they're trying to drive on their product. Right?
Yep, exactly.
And the rest of the industry follows.
Yep, because it makes it cost effective to do so.
Yeah, the more that you don't need anything customized, the more that you could have everything standardized, meaning I could take it off the shelf. You are just replacing it with another spark plug, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
And it doesn't surprise me at all that the CEO of Databank was one of the first. I got the opportunity to know him over the course of the years. I don't know him all that well. I wouldn't pretend like I did, but I've met him before, right? And you can tell that there's always someone that thinks outside the box, right? And someone's going to scratch the paint, but it doesn't surprise me that was that person. But
yeah, he had that mentality. So it was something where, looking at it from the other side of the industry that actually works with all of the other companies, I'm like, that'd be kind of cool to really see that and manage it. Then I was like, well, what about the company itself? They're backed by Mark Ganzi and Digital Bridge, one of the largest infrastructure investors in the world. And talking with Ganzi, he understood it. He got it, the vision of what they wanted to do. And I'm like, oh, this would be kind of a cool move to do it. And like I said earlier, kind of a problem solver. And I like to provide impact. I want to make sure I'm providing impact. AWS has provided impact, bringing them into new countries and everything. Databank, I could see them on this growth curve. So suddenly I could provide impact, use my experience for that scale, and problem solve for them, help them build into the thing and go into the industry and this other side. So like, oh, this could be a very cool opportunity to do that in the industry. So that's why I kind of made the leap.
Very
but
safe.
Then the environment changed over the last couple of years a lot with AI, but it's still been extremely cool to learn all of that and see it from the other side and kind of influence and be a part of that as well.
Well, I still think you're at the most cutting edge. I mean, Digital Bridge, people don't realize, like, I always refer to Mike Faust as the Kaiser Sose of our industry. People don't know who he is, but he's the chairman of Vantage, Databank. He's probably the chairman of 5 different data center operating companies because Digital Bridge owns they bought Compass.
He sits on
they
our
bought
board. Yeah.
Of course, he's the chairman of probably 5 or 6 different boards. But Digital Bridge, for people that don't know, they should know who Mark is, and they should know who Digital Bridge is, because I don't know anybody that's more powerful than them right now in the game. Is there anyone that, they own Switch and Compass and Vantage and Databank and another, I forget how many more, but I know there are more.
Zayo.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is because Databank was buying Zayo before they even, right? So there's a shop that's consolidating a lot of the market right now, and Digital Bridge is that. And a lot of those guys are the gangsters, the original OGs of this industry. I'll share something with you that will come out pretty soon. Before this podcast hits the street, it'll already probably be a press release. But have you seen the Blair Witch Project?
Yeah.
Dan Wyrick, he actually lives up in Seattle. Huh. He's filmed a bunch of other movies, but he and the producer of that movie are doing a documentary on the history of the data center industry.
Oh, wow.
They're going to be using content from this podcast as well as recording a DCAC this year in Austin. So hopefully I could get you at it. But I'm helping him identify some of the pioneering luminaries in this industry. I'm like, look, man, here's 5 or 6 names. This is where I'd go, and I would talk to them first and interview them, because they were the ones that are originally building Digital Realty Trust, which how many companies now in this industry have someone from Digital Realty Trust in their C-suite? Almost every one of them, right? I don't know which company probably pollinated the industry more, but there was other companies that changed the industry. CyrusOne changed the industry in a great way, but every company kind of comes in and has their impact, right? And Amazon had a massive impact on what everybody else in the world was doing, not just hyperscalers, but all the operators that serve them and the G1K, right? So everybody started trying to follow whatever the standard was going to be coming out of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, right? But those are the groups that were coming out with the largest aggregate volume of compute demand, and what they were doing, everyone else is kind of just following, right? So it was kind of like wherever McDonald's went, Burger King would kind of follow, but you kind of see the herd mentality taking shape throughout the country. Do you agree?
Yeah. Whenever Amazon would deploy data centers would start popping up all over
Yeah, of
the
course.
place around it, right?
It was
You build
validated.
an ecosystem around it because a lot of Amazon customers would have their own devices that they couldn't put in the cloud yet, and they'd want them close, so they'd want to figure it out. And so it turned into a market opportunity for data centers to continue to build that ecosystem all the way around it.
What do you see? I mean, you have a crystal ball. You haven't worked there for a little bit, and you're not speaking on behalf of anybody other than yourself right now. But do you see the cloud? What do you see happening in terms of innovation in cloud versus what we're seeing on AI?
That's how best to answer that question. Innovation in the cloud is really about being able to provide services so that people don't have to spend that capital to go use it themselves, right? You can just ease of use to build and grab a product for your own innovation to build what you want. So all the substrate. Where AI is an application to enhance innovation into various areas, provide aggregate amounts of data from multiple points of that are out, disparate points that are out there, right? Is the way I kind of think about it, right or wrong, but it's And so when you look at where innovation happens, AI is in my mind one of the unique things that it's the one application that can make itself better.
Yeah.
It can make anything better around it, but it can make itself better too. And you can point it at different aspects of an industry or problem and help it solve to make it more efficient. So it can help cloud be more efficient. It can help products be more efficient. It can help data centers be more efficient. It can help solve for power issues that we have in the grid and start thinking about it differently. The hydrogen development that we need to do, and in other areas of power and stuff that we need to get development on. We can turn AI loose on some of that stuff, besides all the scary stuff about AI, right? But it's interesting that I think we're going to see some massive innovation happening in the next few years, which is I'm super looking forward to.
So listen, again, we're going to put a pin in that and circle back to it because I wanted to really use the first half of this one just to kind of lay down a foundation because, everyone in this industry, especially in the United States, knows who Databank is, right? And I think that a lot of people now are going to understand a little bit more about you, right? Knowing that you've been there for a few years, but you come from this you were here during the genesis of the industry. Basically, like all the rest of us that were here, the industry today isn't anything like it was when we started 20 years ago, right?
Right. Yeah.
The industry's, many would argue 30 years old. When did Amazon launch its website? 94?
Yeah, I think it was around there.
Let's just say that was, the internet has been around, but that was what brought the internet to the world, so to speak, right? So let's say we're technically, I would always say 25 to 30 years in. Let's just say we're 30 years into this industry and where it's really taking shape. There's so much history on the statistics. I always talk about the data center now as it's a fifth utility. The first one was plumbing. The second was electricity, right? And the third was connectivity, which came in the house probably.
It's so funny you call it a utility.
It is.
We were developing it inside of AWS and thinking about the cloud environment. That was the analogy they used. The cloud just has to be like a plug.
It is.
It just always works.
And it's funny.
The utility, yeah.
But it is. No, the cloud has been viewed by many as a limitless resource of compute technology, where the reality is there is a limitation, and that limitation is power.
Yeah.
Right. And now we're learning the limitation is people, right? Because we've been in this industry for more than 20 years. And so is about half of this industry. So a lot of people, and there are a lot of people that had a full career before they got in this industry, right? So right at the beginning. So we have what's called the silver tsunami, a fair amount of people that could retire in the next 5 to 10 years. Although why would they when it's just about ready to be the most exciting, most vibrant part of our history, right? But I would love for you to walk me through, let's start at the beginning, right? So let's say we agree with people being you're an operations, you're the chief operating officer. What is your greatest challenge? Is it finding places that have enough capacity for power? Is it the type of power you're getting where you're not getting the right time, more renewables? Is it you also have a hard time getting your hands on people that could, bring the vision to life?
Yes.
Yeah, all of it. But
those are all major concerns. I would say people with the skill set in the industry is one of the hardest things to find today. It's always been kind of a niche industry for years, finding those people and those talent. I would say even in AWS, they started looking and investing in schools and teaching programs and things like that to kind of promote and get people learning the stuff so they could bring them on board in a number of ways. And so that's still needed today. Now you have this kind of boom in the data center business because of the demand in AI. So more people are building data centers, and that just enhances the shortage. Your hyperscalers are building more to kind of keep up with their demand. So they're sucking up the talented
Labor
people
force.
as well.
Yeah.
So again, there's a big lack of trades. Skilled trades aspects, your electricians, your mechanical cooling, and, people who have, some of the thermodynamics and just the skilled trades of managing into that. Construction and construction workers, the data techs managing the systems, really kind of in the facilities guys, understanding how, the systems work and repairing them, repairing your diesel generators and all of these pieces. That's a skilled trade. It's not, they got community colleges and stuff to kind of teach that, but you don't need a bachelor's to go do that. You don't need a master's, and these guys make good money.
Oh, they make great careers.
It is definitely a good, six-figure career that you can develop into.
Making $250,000 a year.
Yeah, to develop into it. And so, but you don't have people going into it. And people's mindsets today is you got to go to college, you got to go to college, you got to go to college. That was kind of thing when I was growing up too. It was like, oh, go to college. It was something new and exciting. And then I never used my computer science degree. It opened doors. That was great. Just being at the University of Michigan opened doors and got me in an industry. But everything else I learned on the job, and kind of how to be a sysadmin, that wasn't taught in school.
Would you recommend people go get a computer science degree now?
Depends on what they want to do. It depends on what they do. If they want to do some programming and want to be a programmer, then yeah, it makes sense to kind of go down that route. But there isn't much out there. What if you want to be a network engineer?
Just go play on a network.
Yeah, play on the network. So, it used to be back in the 90s, if you were going to get hired, you had to have a college degree. If you're going to get into technology, they wanted to see a bachelor's or a master's or something in there that said you're going to college. But as the internet started taking off, we started hiring people that were right out of high school. That
were nerds
just,
for 4 years in high
nerds. Then they just work at home. They were programming at home. So, man, we'd bring those people in. They'd be rock stars.
Yeah.
On a lot of fronts. And I think you can get that with the skilled trades. I mean, Apple, and now I think Google's doing it. But you go into the schools and they're getting Chromebooks, right? Or they start getting iPads, and so kids are learning how to operate technology on so many different levels now. It's like, well, why don't we teach them networking and data center stuff all the way down into that level? So when they come out of it and they can start going into these trades, which are phenomenally. They talk about a living wage, man. You're going to make a living wage coming out of this, right? In a skilled trade, it shouldn't be frowned upon or looked down upon at all. Right? Because it's you're supporting an industry that's the underpinning of everything you have. Like you think about it today, everybody's got a tablet, everybody's got a phone, everybody's got a computer in their house. Freaking your refrigerator is internet connected now. All of that technology, your cars, everything is connected in some way, shape, or form, and all of that runs through a data center. All of it.
I think that's the big part is people only see they know of the cloud. It's such a prevalent term. Everyone knows what the cloud is, but none of them really know what it is. They don't realize what the cloud is, building on the ground. And I think what I was trying to do is I wanted to have this conversation, around the people side of it first, primarily around, I think college for everybody has just been plan A. I was the same. I was told, hey, go to school and get good grades. So you go to good college and then you do that. If you get a good job, and if you get a good job, you make good money. If you do that, you're happy type of thing. And I did all those things until I was like halfway into my sophomore year in college. And I was like, this is trash for me. Like this was not what I was all about. Right. And I was just too bored. Right. So I ended up going into the military and enlisting in the military. And that had a kinetic learning environment that was with a great deal of pressure and stress that came with it, because the conditioning that you have and the way that they're teaching you, they teach you how to learn, I think, in an accelerated rate. I learned how to learn in the military, and then they taught me a lot of things. And I think that a lot of people coming out of the military are trained on some form of advanced weapons or machinery or technology. And in many cases, they've also worked in the hierarchy of a healthy team, that tends to put something ahead of the individual, like the mission or the command. And if we can give them an opportunity to be significant coming out of the military, they can bring those skill sets, which may not be as, if you enlist in the military, come out 4, 5, 6 years later, you don't have a college degree, but you have work experience that transcends.
You have a practical experience that is applicable to various parts of the industry. Like if you're going to be in a data tech inside of a data center, running in operations, you can learn the technology of the data center and how to do that. But it's a big piece of it is, can you follow instruction? Can you follow a process? Like you've got to walk rounds in the data center, make sure all the equipment's operating right. You'll listen for different tones coming out of UPS PDU. It's got a little different hum.
Different frequency if it's in discharge.
You're like, oh, something might be wrong with that. But, and there's mechanical infrastructure, there's a diesel generator. But you work through a checklist of being able to do that. And the military gives you that rigid structure, being able to operate that when you have that mindset, which is very cool. So as you can apply that. So, we hire a lot of veterans into the operations staff. Amazon did a lot of it. Databank does a lot of it.
Databank does a lot. We've placed candidates with you. I don't think you knew that, but we've placed several candidates.
That's cool.
Yeah, transitioning veterans. I mean, we wouldn't be where we were as a business today if it wasn't for groups like Databank. I mean, Vantage, Compass. There's a lot of groups that lean in hard and hire veterans. There's a lot of other groups out there too that they're like, I just need people with nothing but data center experience. I'm like,
that's hard to find, and like you've got to have people that can learn and teach, because the other thing I really like about kind of teach me, like, you're always going to need somebody that knows what they're doing, right? But bringing in new people sometimes offers a different perspective. And if you get a solid person, they kind of question it. Why do we do it that way? And then you kind of walk through it and they're like, well, wouldn't this way be a little bit better? And you're like, well, no, we never really thought about it that way. It's, and so what we develop, I always tell people, is might be right for the time or when we decided to do that 5 years ago, but it just might not be right anymore. Right? We learn, we grow. And when you have those different perspectives and you're bringing in there, it helps us question those on a continuous basis, which is great. That's how you be innovative. That's how we make ourselves better, and we think about those things, and we have to be open to that to make that happen.
So what is it that you would be looking for if people were listening right now? Because look, there's going to be people that are listening to this podcast that may be working in some part of the ecosystem, and maybe they want to make the change. Maybe they're on a different part of the supply chain. They want to work for an operator. You were on the enterprise side, wanted to work for an operator. I mean, those are really the three different legs of the stool.
Right.
You could be on the ecosystem, which are people that are involved with the development of the data center, the design of it, the build of it, the commission of it, or the operation of it from an outside perspective. Or you have people that are on the enterprise that are driving that demand from the operator side. And then you enterprise, operator, and ecosystem. That's it, right? So people typically understand where they fit. And for you, when you're on the operator side and you're looking for talent, what is the most important thing that you look for in talent? Or maybe what Databank does? I mean, is it character first or cultural fit first?
Culture's a lot, because you're working with a team. You're working with a group of people, and you have to get along with that group of people a lot. You're in the data center for your 8-hour shift or sometimes 10-hour shifts or more if there's an outage, right? And your ability to work alongside those others is a key aspect in the culture that the company's developed. And that's one of the things I really like about Databank is the culture they've developed. And with that culture now, it's, can you follow process? Do you have a rigidity and structure around you to be able to do that? Because that's required. Like, this thing is operating 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, all around the clock. And if there's a glitch, remember we talked about all that infrastructure and technology that's running on it. It goes down. It's not a good thing, right? There's impact out there for businesses. And so, there's redundancy built in, but now you got to figure out, how do I solve for that? Like, I got to pinpoint it, do it, follow the process around it. It's also very, high electrical power. There's serious injury can happen.
Dangerous
if you don't do it right. Right. And so you've got to follow instruction. You've got to be safe, and you've got to have that rigidity to do that, not be a cowboy. Oh, I can just try this switch. Well, that's not going to work. Right. You have to know the ramifications of what's going to happen around that. And so we look for people that have that cultural fit, but then you have to have that mentality. Can I be rigid around that and understand it? And then I also want them to be able to have, be able to speak up a little bit and show us that innovation and question what we're doing as well. Not to be disruptive, but to be additive to us and what we're thinking, right? And be ownership and a sense of pride. And, a lot of our data tanks have this huge sense of pride and ownership. This is my building. Like, look what we're doing, how clean it is, and what we can manage to it. And, there's a big sense of pride. And, they solve a problem for a customer, and a customer will, send them dinner. Like suddenly, food will show up and they get a nice dinner, brought in for them. And they love that stuff. They make a difference, and they know that there's impact and they're valued. Which is cool. And, again, they're doing well, and you can learn a lot, right? And the data techs start to become our pool of people to seed other parts of the company. They get excited about learning security. Suddenly they want to, and so we got us opening the security team for a junior person. Well, we can transition that person over.
Yeah.
And so construction, they see the construction team going in there, and they'll start talking to them and go, oh, that's really cool. I want to move over there now. Or they might start thinking, I might want to program. So they'll talk to, some of the development team and learn some things. And they'll say, recommend, here's some night courses. And of course, Databank will subsidize, and pay for some of these trainings and courses if you want to enhance your career. So they'll go off and go to school, learn some of that, and then we can transition them over. And we know, because they're already a cultural fit, we know they're passionate about their aspects. They actually know they've learned the infrastructure and pieces, and they're learning more of the business. So they're much more valued to keep and grow internal talent up through the company, which is amazing.
So, just to recap all that, and that was fantastic, by the way. Thanks for breaking it down. And I want to make sure I summarize it for people that are listening, because, you're a big name, big company, and there are people that want to get in the game, right? Especially on the operator side. What I would summarize for people that are listening is you didn't list experience is the number one thing. You listed culture, and talent wasn't even something that you listed as a second thing. What you said was creativity, right? So you're looking at this industry, I think, rewards people that want to reinvent themselves and they're creative. And I don't think we don't fire people based on their experience. We typically don't fire them based on their talent. We typically fire them based on some element of their personality or their character. And that's typically the number one reason why we should hire in the first place. And you basically said it. You're like, culture is a big part and creativity is the other. So when you have people like us, you have kids?
Through my significant other. Yeah.
Okay. But college age, where they want to go to school?
14 and 17.
Okay. So like if they wanted to get in this industry, what would you recommend? Would you say go to college? Would you go to the trades, go to the military? Those are the really three paths that lead here. If you were to look at this industry right now and look at the opportunities that this future provides, this is like a recession-proof industry, because we grow faster than every other industry because of every other industry. So there's three ways to get into the greatest industry in the world. This industry will be a mainstream industry soon. Just like electricity was 45 to 47 years before it pivoted, right? 40 years for the automobile, 27 years for the telephone, right? So it takes time before it pivots and becomes mainstream. If you had to sit down and talk to anybody right now, and you're like, you have three paths to get into the technology infrastructure industry, which is data centers: college, the trades, or the military. What is plan A?
I would probably say trades.
Okay. What's plan B?
Plan B, military's there because you can learn a lot from it. I always get leery saying that with all the wars that are happening in the world
we're
today.
We're at peacetime right now, though. Yeah, we're peacetime.
But it's always something to worry about and think about.
Well, the next wars will not be fought like the previous wars. They're going to be technology wars. They're going to be people standing with drones. They're going to have things that don't have human beings at risk. They're going to be driving those things remotely from afar, right?
But I'd say it's not so much college as it is technical colleges. There are small or technical things. If you want to be a network engineer, there's some smaller places out there you can learn to do that. You want to be a sysadmin, or even, there's Data Center University out there. There's a couple places where you can go and learn some of that stuff for educational pieces. You got to really dig in and understand that. But like I said, a lot of it is learning that structure, rigidity, and process around it and managing it. You talked about experience. Like, we're hiring data tech, our junior level people just out of every industry. It's that they have that ability to learn. I do need, if I'm going to hire someone senior, like we're bringing that in, right?
But you're grooming those from the bottom up.
But from the bottom up coming in, those are all kind of there. And I'd put kind of college last, because there isn't much there other than an ability to learn and understand, how to teach yourself. But if you have that mentality already, then you don't really need someone to kind of teach you how to teach or teach you how to learn.
I think that the college for me now, I have 2 kids in university, and I just look at it as a great place to park them until they figure out what they want to do when they grow up. Because there's worse things to be doing, right? So at least they're learning the social dynamic of, putting together a party at college or something like that. Showing up and finishing something. But I agree with you. I think the trades or the military are a healthier plan A for this industry. This industry values those soft skills and talents that come from the field trades or the military, because those are soft.
Yep.
I was a tradesman. I had a rating, I had an NEC, a naval enlisted career, which I could have stayed in that rating for 20 plus years, like I could have an electrician, right? So, so now we kind of covered the bases on the people side, and while doing that, we dovetailed into, the value of, I'm not saying that I am poo-pooing on the entire education program, because I'm a big fan of learning, and I do believe in the value of knowledge, but I don't know if a homogeneous construct at a certain university is going to give us that.
Like,
right?
Look, if you're going to learn, you want to learn programming and be a programmer, go to school. If you want to go into a lot of other fields, thermodynamics, civil engineering,
big important ones.
Those are big important parts of our industry that we need, and you've got to go to school for those.
Yeah, those ones
right.
Are real.
So you've got to understand the science and the details behind that, and how all that comes together and work. Those are critical pieces, and those are, again, very skilled trades that you'll learn in college. So it's not there. We were talking about kind of data center operators, and coming to that piece of the industry is a little different. You don't necessarily need college for that, right? You don't need to learn through that institution to be able to do that stuff. Well, just like if you're going to be an electrician, or if you're going to be, like I said, a mechanic, or some of those pieces that are critical for keeping these sites online.
Well, I think the last thing, I agree with you, by the way. I think the last thing I would say on the people side, just to reiterate something that you said was, and you said it in this way, and I'm going to summarize it again, was just get in the game. Like you were saying, just get in the game. And if you don't like that, then go get into construction, or go get into sysadmin, or go get into the networking team, or go get into operations or security or whatever. But just get in the game first, and then figure out.
College is expensive, right? And the costs continue to go through the roof, because then everybody's beating the drum to go to college. But if you get in with a company, like Databank or others, they will pay for university for you, for college classes for you. So if you figure out you want to do something different, you're making a healthy salary. You're learning about a skilled trade that is valuable, that you can always fall back on, in a core piece of the technology infrastructure that's running out there. And they will help subsidize you to learn something else if you want to do something and follow a dream in some other passion that you learn about through the industry. I think it's a huge win.
So listen, I'm going to keep pulling at these threads here that you're giving me, because this is, people don't want to hear from me, but you're the CEO of Databank, and they're a multi-billion-dollar company. People are going to take a little bit more stock in the things that you're saying. So let's talk a little bit about the industry as a whole, right? It's painted with a broader stroke. What do you see coming in the next 3 to 5 years? Like I'll start from a commercial or marketing perspective. I would bet you in 5 years from now, we're watching commercials about data center capacity like you would car commercials. I think that it may be a point in time where people start having their own on-prem type of personalized data centers at home. But I see the data center becoming at the top of everyone's lexicon. It'll be an industry that everybody understands, and it'll create a much larger orbit around it in terms of what those ecosystems look like. When Ford made the automobile, they created an ecosystem of companies that competed over who was selling it tires and who was selling it brake pads and windshield wipers and everything else, right? So this ecosystem is kind of mature right now, right? We've got a decent one rolling, but what the demand of AI is going to create is this massive disruption to what we've created in terms of solving the problem for cloud, right? We just barely got close to solving the problem for the Internet of Things, or IoT. Yeah. And then all of a sudden we had this huge monumental explosion of demand that we saw from cloud, and you saw that cloud product first. I mean, you had a front row seat for 16 and a half years, and you saw the amount of scale that had, and the only thing that you could ever imagine would scale beyond that is what we're seeing with AI now, right? So from a pretty broad stroke, I see it becoming a mainstream commercialized product that most people are going to understand how whatever they're studying at school, how it relates to the 8 or 9 different job domains that represent 280 jobs within this industry, right? They could get into this industry regardless of what they're studying in school, unless they're going to medical school or law school or, some of the professional engineering type of things. But really, everything, there's an opportunity for everything in this vertical. So I want I'm curious what you think you're seeing in terms of the industry and how it's going to have an impact on society, maybe from the jobs, the way that we educate our children, or the way that we get them into learning curriculums that allow them to have a stronger skill set that's applicable or more relevant, right? Because we could be sending them to school right now to learn shit that in 2 years from now will be obsolete from a technology basis, right? Or to go learn things. I'll tell you, I think in 10 years from now, the need for doctors will be massively reduced. I think that you'll have a lot of PAs and nurses, but I think that you'll have a machine that a lot of us humans slide through and it comes back and it diagnoses everything we need to with a massive amount of accuracy. And then you have a human being who is medically licensed in some capacity, who's going to be the bedside manners that helps you figure out how you're going to get healthy. But I do see the technology itself removing certain things because technology would be more dependent on how we live on the day-to-day. But I also see that creating a whole tidal wave of jobs downstream of that to support that capability. So that's what I see.
Yeah.
What do you see?
That's a lot. That's a lot. I don't know about the data centers in an advertisement, but I think there is definitely an awareness starting to happen with the advent of AI. People are starting to understand that data centers are the underpinning technology that needs to keep all of this stuff running and keep it going. Back in the day, I talked to relatives. They didn't know what the hell a data center was.
What do you tell people you do now?
Yeah. Well, I tell them about data centers, but they understand a data center now. Like it's more proliferation out there of what a data center is. They don't fully understand the full concept of what's involved and the cooling and the power and all the dynamics.
How do you describe it? I described it as the fifth utility. Right?
I try to keep it simple. I tell them it's a giant refrigerator that houses a bunch of PCs. Right. So because they're like, well, what does it do? And why do you need a data center? I'm like, well, you ever run in your laptop and it's sitting on your lap and it's hot? Well, imagine like 10,000 of those all in one room. It gets really hot.
Yeah, no
right?
kidding.
So you got to keep it cool. So, a data center is just basically a big refrigerator to keep it all cool. Well, but that also requires a lot of power. So we got to feed all that power, but power transitions into heat. And so, you're keeping that cool and power and you're kind of making it. So they understand that at a high level, what that building does. And then I go into it and just basically say, well, yeah, look at your phone. Every application on your phone, every piece you use runs through a data center. It's originated out of a data center. Like, what? My Facebook's on a data? Yes, your Facebook's coming out of a data center.
How far are we away from standardizing on that narrative to where we could explain it? Like, from what I'm told, to try to get it into the mainstream in a capacity in which they can understand it, it has to be at a 7th grade level of education.
That's about right.
That's what the media
speaks. I've heard that before as well.
So we have to be able to break down the sky for the cloud, the home for AI, into one technology engine that serves as the primary vehicle of technology compute for both of those vehicles, right? But how do we do that to where there's the same sheet of music that we're all singing on?
Yeah. So how you described it as a utility works when you're talking to another business. When you're like, hey, I got to put my stuff in the cloud. What does that mean? Well, the cloud is just another utility for you to run your application in, to be able to manage it so that it's effectively always there and all the underpinning pieces you need is there. And all the tools you need to maybe develop enhancement or add-ons for your application are there, right? So from that perspective, if you're talking to, the 7th grader, he doesn't understand what that means. So then I had to dumb it down a little bit more. But the data centers are what house all of those components. So it's interesting that when you put that explanation to there and what you're going to go, I think that's where it's going to head. And as AI kind of develops, AI becomes the application that is enhancing other applications or other areas. So I could easily see it becoming the AI house, right? Well, that's where the AI sits, or that's where it's, being developed. Oh, we got the weather AI. Oh, that sits over here. Like, I could see people starting to equate that together because they know it's AI. It's just on the internet. Well, where's the internet? Internet's inside the data centers, right? People are starting to learn and bring that together. And I think there's a correlation there, but it's interesting. I don't know how to think about, how a data center is advertised in, the next 5 years.
I'll tell you why.
That's interesting.
Well, we advertise cloud. Cloud's a commercial. I've seen cloud commercials, right? So I just tell people the cloud is really someone else's data center. It's a data center. It's just someone else's.
Yeah.
They don't have to manage the responsibility of the security and make sure the lights are always on. The cloud is outsourcing your data center capacity needs to someone else. So then that takes us back to what's a data center. I'm like, well, you have plumbing in your home, you have electricity, you have connectivity, and then you have gas, right? So if you add those four things together, you equal one data center. And those four things added together is a whole utility. Those are four utilities. Add them together, you have the fifth utility. I don't know how to break it down into a simpler way, but everyone at home knows what electricity and plumbing is in the house. I would imagine that if they had to sit down and choose between those four utilities at their home, whether they have gas, some form of connectivity, if it's fiber, probably now in the house, but it used to be copper, right? For phones and stuff like that. But now you have, plumbing, electricity. If you were to go to your kids and be like, okay, you have to lose either connectivity, so no internet, or plumbing, so you can't flush the toilets, or electricity, so you can't turn the lights on and charge your phone. What do you think the kids would want to give up if they have to give up all those things? They'd be like, I could go to someone's house and charge my phone for a little bit, but don't lose the connectivity. I got to be on the internet, right? But if you add those things together, now we're talking about building data centers that are no longer supporting just their own capacity demands, but now they're going to have to put enough capacity online to backfeed the grid, in certain markets, because the Goldman Sachs report that I read last month was 47 gigs of capacity that's necessary. So think about it like this. We're 6 months away from 2025. So they're saying by 2030, we're at 3%. The U.S. demand of power from data centers is approximately 3% of the national power demand.
Yeah, 3 to 4.
They're saying by 2030, it'll be 8 to 9. So we're going to triple in the next 5.5 years. That's going to be really interesting, right? So knowing, how prevalent data centers are going to be, because now there's going to be a huge demand for labor to support that much growth, not just in the space, the power and the cooling, but the infrastructure for power, right? Generation of energy, which of that 47 gigs, that means the utilities aren't bringing that on the line. We're going to have to go into places and
utilities got a huge problem. Like when you think about where the utilities are, so residential. So we talk about the data centers.
Yeah.
You just talked about being 3-4%. Residential today is 35% of the total load, right? And everybody is getting a device. Everything's interconnected. You've seen edicts in Washington, where I live, in Seattle, and in California. They want to, no gas-powered cars. Everything's got to be electric vehicles. Got to plug them into the
grid. How are they going to support charging them?
Yeah, they want to get rid of natural gas. Okay, so I got to take my natural gas stove and make it electric. I got to take my natural gas furnace, make it electric. So I'm going electric. And by the way, we're going to cut all the supply because it's all coal burning. So I want to increase all this electric utilization. So we talk about data centers increasing. Residential is going to increase massively as well. Like they're seeing huge. So you already have rolling brownouts that happen in California and other parts of the country, because in the summertime, everybody turns their air conditioner on and they cause an overload on the grid. Well, if just turning air conditioners on all over the place, what do you think happens when you start plugging in cars and everybody has to get an EV?
Exactly right.
And, I'll suddenly have to put all my heavy load, furnaces, stoves, dryers that can run on gas much more efficiently, have to all go to electric. And by the way, we're cutting that supply. What do you think we're going to do then? Now you've got data centers and electronics that you add to that. And what they're doing, data centers are more in the news today because of AI and, this big power, right? And you plug a data center, it takes a lot of power, and you plug it into the middle of a residential area, because that's where we want to be, as close to the population to deliver that technology fast. And it highlights the failures in the grid. Like it suddenly exposes them. It's not like, in my belief, with the residential growth and the move to electric, they're going to be keeling over and failing in the next few years anyways. Bring a data center in, you're making it fail over faster. But it still takes up to 10 years to build some of this infrastructure out. We're behind. And so we have to think about, from a technology perspective in the data center, how can we be innovative? What can we do knowing this is coming, and drive to be able to generate our own or drive other areas? Renewable's great, but the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. So how do we manage into that? There's some really cool developments happening on hydrogen these days, which is awesome. There's, I think it's MIT that's doing some research into geothermal back into Texas, using old oil wells that they had and drilling deeper and using geothermal. That stuff is still expensive today, but the data center industry, because of that power and what they need, is going to help drive that innovation to happen. They have to, in order to be able to meet the demands and needs that's going out there, with the supply side being more and more constrained.
What do you see being the solution in the short term and the long term on power?
That's a tough one. The short term, I don't see how they're going to be able to turn off the coal stuff that they keep saying they're going to turn off. I just don't think that's going to be viable to keep up with demand. If you want to have all, these electric cars by 2030, 2040, everybody's electric.
But they're plugged into dirty coal.
They're going to have to be, because there's just not enough supply out there. But, there's going to be stopgap measures like with peak shaving battery storage, right? So how, there's a lot of development that's happened in that. A lot of the grids are looking at battery storage to be able to distribute power. They're going to look at limiting when you can charge and when you can manage it, because there is off-peak. Everybody's sleeping. Not much is charging at that point. They got phones plugged in overnight, but not using it, so it's not spinning up and drawing more power. So they'll start shifting and try to manage that. What's interesting is it's the population centers that are constrained. You go to North Dakota or the middle of Indiana, which you're hearing a bunch of data centers now being built, there's no population there, so the grid has ample power to supply into those areas because residential isn't using it, or manufacturing and isn't using it. So there's pockets out there that will probably move distribution into, in some of these cases with the data centers and applications that we just are forced to. But the residential areas, they're just going to have to figure out how to keep maintaining that. Now, like I said, there's development into hydrogen. I think you'll see some of that kind of take off and gets a little more clean energy. I know like Chevron and those guys are doing a lot of research in the Texas market to try to figure out what they can manage into it. We will see some of that renewable kind of get pushed to bring online. Again, like we said, the hyperscalers are pushing hard to make all that stuff happen for them and helping bring that to the guys. They have to.
Your old company just bought a nuclear reactor program in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, they bought all the data centers right next to the nuclear reactor. Nuclear is one that is, technology's come a long ways. We're all scared about 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and, Fukushima. And, by the way, we had data centers over there, in Japan when that all happened, and everything was great and stable. That natural disaster, they didn't account on it for that nuclear reactor. But where they've come today, they're a lot safer with everything that they've got on it. But there's a stigma around it. Nobody wants it in their backyard. Well, nobody wants transmission lines in their backyards either. No, you have to go build a lot of those. I think I was reading an article where they're recommending we spend another $30 billion a year in just purely building transmission lines to get it out there, to get power everywhere it needs to go, right? Because a lot of the renewables have to be built in remote locations. You can't build it in residential. There's no room.
Yeah.
So
I agree with what you're saying. You're saying that we're going to end up going in the second and the third tier markets to where there's stranded capacity that, like, especially around, Indiana, or markets in which they're distressed markets that are being repurposed now. Like there was some manufacturing that was there, then it went away. Now
steel went away, or aluminum went away, and
it's the best way to repurpose. I mean, it's the greatest impact that those hyperscalers can make on humanity and society, is to go into a market that's distressed and find resources. I know Meta was doing a lot of it. There was a buddy of mine over there that was like, man, I'm going into Michigan. I'm buying all these old factories that don't work, and we're going to turn them into modular, skid, blah, 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 to do whatever they're doing for their product. Because again, they're on the enterprise side. They know what their product is that they're designing for. Whereas you're building vanilla, because you have to be ready for any one of those people to come in, right? Where they are purpose-built for their own environment, so they know exactly how to efficiently design and deliver a product that's just designed for that kit, right? And I think that, have you seen Nuclear Now? Have you watched that documentary on Apple TV? Go watch it. I think it'll blow your mind. Okay. I tell everyone to watch
Nuclear Now.
Nuclear Now. It's Oliver Stone, and it really bifurcates the difference between nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. Okay. And it does a really good job of interviewing. I mean, like naval reactors, like last week celebrated 75 years and being in business, and they have literally put hundreds of small modular reactors in the fleet, and we've never had an incident with any one of them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so we've been doing nuclear for 75 years, right? And we have the ability to demonstrate with the right process management,
right?
The human conditioning, the training, and the development that goes into that, attention to detail. If we have those things, then you could in a very healthy way, in a safe way, you can adopt this application of power and energy that is more reliable, more scalable, and more sustainable for the long term. Right now, I mean, fossil fuel, oil, coal, I mean, it's an untenable solution to meet. If we're going from 3% to 9% in the next 5 years, if we're tripling in terms of the demand of power that's registered from one vertical of industry in the next 5.5 years, we don't have time. You're going to have another, it's only a matter of time, I think. If you see, the hyperscalers out buying reactors is a solution, then don't you think the operators will be soon to follow?
Potentially. Like they're not really buying the reactor, to be clear.
They're buying a
they bought the
PPA.
data center and everything, the power off that reactor right there. It is something that, in the past, when we've talked to the hyperscalers, like, hey, we could put a data center over next to this nuclear reactor. I'm like, no, we don't want to go near that. That would be bad. It would be bad press. It's all about optics and press, and you want to avoid that. But they're left no choice now. Right?
Yeah.
There's just nothing else available. So, and as you said, it is safe, it is clean, and what it can generate. So, is there potential for operators to start looking to buy that power and be near there? If the hyperscalers and others are willing to go there, then yes, that'll happen, right? Your supply and demand will help drive it, and that will manage into it, and then it'll help us manage more into the power arena, which is great, like we should be, right?
Yeah. What are some of the things that are most exciting for you as you look down the horizon and you see what AI is bringing our direction?
Oh gosh, the innovation. I truly believe in like in 5 years or so, the world's going to be a different place.
In what way?
The innovation that AI can do. I saw a demo of some AI works, and they were talking about how they're managing the weather. And, we see hurricanes come in off the coast of Florida, and they're like, oh, this hurricane's going to hit in Miami. And next thing you know, it hits North Carolina, right? And they were just off because the wind changed. And they're like, oh, we kind of accept that it can change last minute. And they were kind of running their model, and they're like, look, the predictive analysis that we can do by modeling this through AI, we can tell you within a mile of where it's going to hit and be accurate every time. That's game changing for an area, because most people are like, it could miss us, it couldn't. But suddenly you start building this accuracy in there. Or you look at rain and you say, hey, it's got 55% chance of rain today. Well, that means in that area, 55% of the area could be hit with rain, but you don't know where. But they're predicting that in a few years, as they build these models, the AI will be able to tell you within like 10 feet of where it's going to rain. So it's going to rain at your location. That changes how we think, what we do, how we operate out there. From anything from I'm going to have a picnic, I know it's going to rain in that park or not, like suddenly changes your mindset. Those kinds of things are all over the place in industries all over. There's a pharmaceutical company is running models through AI for their drug development, and the stuff that they can learn and do and kind of enhance on such a fast basis with all these data points that used to take them years to do, they're doing in weeks now. And like, oh my God, this is phenomenal about how it can learn and change industries and manage it, even applying into the data center itself, right? Like suddenly, when you're operating, you're worried about a hotspot in a data center, right? But suddenly, if the AI can learn where that hotspot is most likely to show up,
it could design it
by looking at the loads of all the servers and that variability and where the cooling is, it can measure all those things really fast and tell you, hey, you're going to have a problem over here.
It can calculate it in advance.
And something you're like, oh, I can fix that before that happens, right? I can apply that to just about any other industry out there.
Okay, so take that same thought, not just in the industry, but as it dovetails into our personal lives. Do you see people using that technology as a source of validation for other things outside of just like, I do believe that there'll be a time where we could submit our drawings, our designs into, the machine of AI and be like, did we design it the most efficient way we can? Or are we still being wasteful in the way? Because there's waste in design, waste in operations, right?
Yep.
But I imagine that AI will one day come back and be like, hey, you don't need this, or this is maybe it's because we also take the reliability requirements that are pretty robust at the MEP side, and we reduce that down by removing components from the design itself. It could be engines, it could be UPSs, it could be something. And then they're just building the reliability at the network topology, right? So at that level, that's that metroactive replication that you were talking about, where we could just have an entire thing go down. And now I don't need all the tier 1 or tier 2 or N plus this or EIEIO. Now I just need something that has enough backup reliability into it to where the network can catch it. You get what I'm saying? So like, I think that AI will help us engineer around those technology problems. The question is does that same AI help us run the same traps on unintended consequences to decisions that are made in society? I'll give you an example. The Colt revolver emerging piece of technology when it came out, right? No one understood what the unintended consequences would be during the second industrial revolution when we got that. We didn't realize, I mean, the locomotive train was the byproduct of the steam engine, which was the number one form of power that we got in the first industrial revolution. How many people died because of trains? How many people were saved because they were on trains and got them across the country to get them where they needed to be? I mean, you could take that to trains, to guns, you could take it to social media. How many kids have been bullied from social media to the point in which they killed themselves, right? We don't know, right? But we know that there's an unintended consequence to every type of technology that we introduce into society. Do we think that this type of AI capacity has the a capacity to do a linear trend advance forecast on what we would be doing from a society's perspective? Like, hey, if you guys continue to do this, then it's more likely that you will be at war with China in the next 3 years, as an example, or something like that. Do you see that the technology
could? I think it very well could. It's
it's all scary. We've all heard about all the scary stuff.
There is a ton of scary stuff that can happen out there with AI, but I think it could enhance us in running scenarios for optimizing it the way it needs to be. And here's your danger zones, and here's probably with some good paths. And I think it's going to open up a lot more ways for us to think about things and gameplay that out. And I think AI can do that. It's going to make us think about, that's why I said in 5 years. So, it takes a while for these models to learn, right? You got to bring all this data in, and it's got to learn, and it's got to continue to enhance on it in various aspects. You got kind of a general model, or it just tries to talk to you and cover many subjects, or very specific like the weather or other areas. So those models are going to get developed and get that data, and then they'll continually learn as new inputs come in. So the inference models, but it takes them a couple of years, 2-3 years, really to come up to speed, is my understanding. So, that's why in about 5 years you're going to see these models start spitting out. You're going to start seeing them spitting out this data and this information, and start changing the way that we're enhancing things, or we're maneuvering through things, or the way we experience life, right? Like I said, just thinking about going to the park in a different way, or shopping in a different way, or making access into something, or designing a house a different way.
Yeah,
we're going to learn new ways and interesting ways that we can do this structurally more sound.
You could design efficiencies in and out of a product.
And it'll change cost structures. It'll change the way we interact and operate. It's got so many different things that can apply to even teaching, learning, like how we teach our kids today in school, and topics and learning aspects. It'll help us think of different ways to do it, be able to run through and apply those scenarios and change the way we think.
So you get to sit behind the green curtain of Oz a little bit because, one, it seems like you've had a lot of exposure to a lot of shit, but are you optimistic about all this AI stuff? Are you worried?
There is a part of me that's worried about the bad stuff that can happen. As an example, AI can learn from you. So we're sitting here talking, this is being recorded. It can learn my voice. It can learn my intonations, inflections of how I speak, where then it can call you and it'll sound just like me. Even worse yet, it's got a picture of me now. So it can actually take my image and map it to the voice. So it can pull up a Zoom call. It can start a Zoom call, think it's me talking to one of my employees to go tell them to do something. They won't know. How would they know? That scares me, right? What kind of, black magic's going to happen out of that?
In-person live meetings only.
Yeah. So, or how are you going to manage, like, code words, whatever? You're going to have to manage something differently. Yes. You got to think about it. Like, and that is true. There's a ton of scams out there today where people call up and say, "Hey, I'm your cousin Johnny, and I'm in jail, and I just got pulled over. Can you send me $50?" Right? I hear about those all the time, and I know people who've fallen for that, right? And they're like, "Oh yeah, it sounded just like him." Well, now it's an AI that has personal information that sounds like you. It's going to be much more convincing for stuff like that to happen. It's going to be harder and harder.
I imagine that argument that you're making, though, is no different than the argument they were making in the third industrial revolution. After World War II, we started the third industrial revolution in 1969. Well, technically we did it after Vietnam, right? And that's when we started rolling out the first major wave of emerging technologies. I mean, we were putting people on the moon. We were mapping our genetic code. The amount of advancements we made in science from, medications and inoculations and anesthesia, but really it came down to technology. I mean, we used nuclear weapons in between the second and third industrial revolution, but we mastered nuclear energy during the third, but we were really making the genesis of AI by making all these advanced computers. And really that led us into, power is the theme for every industrial revolution. The first was the steam engine. The second was the automotive engine, as well as AC and DC. The third was nuclear power. The fourth was AI and AR and VR. And who knows what the fifth is? The fifth sounds like it could be the fifth utility during the fifth industrial revolution. Yeah. But I think the data center will one day become something that will become one of the biggest mainstream industries, right? Try to think about
the world will not be able to operate on its technology without it. And as technology becomes more a key piece of our everyday lives and in everything that we do and in every piece of industry, it is a core aspect, just like your utility plug, like you're saying, like your power. Like it is, your technology won't run without it. So it's there. We've got to have the data centers. It's got to run the technology. The world doesn't move without it. Like it's such an underpinning.
So you said you did have some concerns about AI. Are you optimistic at the same time?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. Look, to be clear, my concerns are in how it can be used. But like you said, anything can be used in the bad way. We're always going to have bad actors out there. We always have, always will. And so, we have to be aware of it and figure out how we safeguard ourselves with it. I don't know what other ways, we'll learn new ways that bad actors can act or AI can take off. But I don't think it's going to be I don't think we're going to run into the Terminator type of scenario. I don't think it's going to go that way at all. But it does, open up more doors for us to think about things differently. And so what we do with that and how we progress is going to be interesting. So it could open up doors that people go down a bad path, right? Or promote a bad path. But for the most part, I think it's going to change the world for the better in a lot of ways. And I really wish we would think about that more. Like we talk about the power shortages and we talk about like I mentioned, hydrogen can be developed and there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen there. Well, let's turn AI loose on some of this stuff. Let it run. Help it solve its own problem. It's consuming all this power. How do you make yourself more efficient? How do we do power generation in a safe way? How do we manage it to be zero emissions? And how do we manage renewables better or the battery technology? How do we make it better? You start turning AI loose on that stuff and it's going to innovate for us faster, which I think is great.
There are concerns, like AI is teaching itself that it created its own language so that AI machines could talk to each other without humans understanding what they were talking about. I think the people that are worried about the doomsday scenario that comes as the byproduct of AI are the same. They're probably the kids or the offsprings of the same parents that were worried about what happens when we proliferate, nuclear weapons and we started dropping a couple bombs. Like everyone probably was like, "This is the end of the world as we know it." I think the technology, the fifth industrial revolution, was designed for us to have a healthier and more harmonious relationship with the technology in our lives. And what I think it's already beginning to do is provide more transparency to those that literally, there's a lot of propaganda in the news and in the media, right? There's a lot of programming and conditioning that comes with that.
There is.
And I think that the more access we have to technology, the more people have the access to kind of be able to come to their own conclusion on what they believe because they don't have to rely on
hear the whole story versus a piece that only paints a picture of one way, right?
Agreed.
Which would be cool. That would be great. It used to be the press supposed to be independent, right? And you see it's not today.
It's not at all.
Very, very one-sided in whatever they're reporting on. It could be left or right or whatever, but it's always definitely one-sided.
Which I saw a post. Someone sent me a post the other day and it was like, isn't it crazy to think like if you're patriotic and you post a picture of you holding the American flag, people kind of already know who you're voting for type of thing, right? There's a big schism that's being generated. There's, mainstream media and there's corporate media. There's, this is another form of media where I think a lot of people turn to podcasts to get unfiltered information in a long version like this, where people are going to know a little bit about you. So when you start talking about the things that you believe in or you're scared of, they have the optics and how they could view you through, and they can filter that through how, oh, I know how he is. I have a cousin like that. Yeah. They tend to lean more this way or that way, or
you get judged instantly. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just look at it as we try to understand the optics and where people are speaking from, right? Because sometimes I've literally been talking to people. I'm like, just take the binoculars and flip them the other way, and now look at the problem. And they're like, oh, that's completely different. I'm like, it's just the way you're viewing it, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that I mean, this industry has a lot to offer, and there's so much growth potential where you and I could sit down and talk for another hour just on power, right? And I've spent a lot of time meeting a lot of the power generation groups in this industry, because it's really a whole other vertical of industry. Oil and gas is on a collision course with data centers. And let's say that the oil and gas industry operates completely different than the data center industry. They're very transaction based, I've learned. So they're not looking for an annuity model based relationship, like a strategic partnership. They're like, hey, we're going to do this with you, but let's do it 20 more times so you could scale. The oil and gas people are still very much like, just get that one deal, and who cares if we see them again? We just need to get that next one. And it's almost, I view them as predators, to be honest. You know, there's not all of them are like that, and I'm painting with a broad stroke, but I'm like, it's going to take time to introduce how we shift from diesel engines as a backup to natural gas engines as a primary, and, you know, putting the utility as a backup as an example. And that relationship that we have to have with that part of the ecosystem is pretty huge. And that's
getting that natural gas distribution built out there, right? Like we talked a lot about transmission lines and building out the grid and stuff like that, but there is alternatives. Natural gas is a good short-term stop to get us over the hump. It's clean burning. Yes, it missed some CO2, but now the CO2 capture stuff that they've got out there is getting better and better. So, you know, it's still the very small amount of bad emissions out of it versus a diesel generator, right? You've got CO2 capture aspects, but the distribution and getting gas out there and running it cost effectively still needs innovation. Still needs
capacity,
support,
storage problems,
all of that stuff to manage into. But again, we can start using AI to help run logistics and how to do that.
Run models.
Government,
tell us what to do.
like instead of mandating we turn stuff off, how about they put some funds into the natural gas industry to help that distribution, to get the clean energy out there, to get us to this in a step process out there. Like, we just need to be, to get people under there. It's unfortunate that it's turned into a political agenda versus a technology agenda to actually get to what they want to achieve and do things along those step processes to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, this has been a great podcast, by the way. I appreciate you making the time. I normally ask people, what do you tell people you do for a living? But I try to hit that one here, because what I'm hoping that people are listening to this to, one, they understand a little bit more about Databank and who you are and where you came from. You did a really good job, I think, explaining to people what it is that your team is looking for, a strong, healthy cultural fit with someone who's creative. And I think there's a ton of opportunities. My advice to everybody is, if you don't know where to start, just take the first job that's in the industry. And then if you want to be on the CapEx side, on the construction side, instead of the OpEx side, on the operations side, figure out a way to, I'm pretty sure that once you're a dependable resource, your company will find a way to help scale and grow you, right? Because we're investing so much into our
people. We want to keep them. We want to keep them. We want them to grow the company. I'd much rather grow somebody internally than hire somebody from external to a higher position, because they understand the business. They understand the people. They've shown how they operate. We know how to work with them. They're a cultural fit. All these unknowns that are out there for bringing someone in make it tough.
I think the greatest advantage, I'm with you 1,000%, by the way. I was just having a conversation with my COO about it. And I was like, you know what I like about the ones that we haven't tried is we've already taught them which mistakes not to make. We've already paid for their mistakes. Yeah. So if we bring in someone else, they're going to make the same mistakes. So these ones already know which ones not to make. So let's continue to invest in them, because like it's law of human nature. We're going to fail. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to miss it. And then we build from that. So I'm like, the more mistakes we make. Yeah. And look, everybody has the right to learn and grow and fail and make those mistakes, right? So I'm a big fan of how the technology industry itself is really bringing society together with technology in a way that could introduce something that's healthier for humanity. The technology, like I never used social media at all, right? Hated it, was scared of it, didn't want my privacy messed with. Now it's the greatest source for my workouts. I get a lot of cool inspirational messages on my Instagram every day. They'll probably send me a recipe or two for something that I like to cook, but or maybe even something that's romantic that I could send to someone or something. But technology has now really begun something that I begin to use more. And I think that you'll see other people embracing it and using technology in a healthier way.
Yeah.
I look at it like fast food. There was a time where none of us knew the unintended consequences of fast food. Yeah. Now, I mean, you're a grown ass man. Do you eat McDonald's 3 days? I mean, you could, but we don't, because we know that it's an affordable luxury that we may have as in a celebration or a last minute this and that, but we tend to want to put something healthier into our systems. And I think that the way that we use our technology will be the same. Yeah. Don't you agree?
I agree.
I think this is just the beginning. I hope that I could get you to participate in these podcasts more, and maybe even participate in our conference. But this is a really great story, and like sharing your story about where you came from. It's super inspiring to see where you went from. I mean, you were literally just a farm nerd.
Yeah.
That ended up working for the largest hyperscaler in the world, the largest cloud provider in the world. And now you're working for one of the most, efficient, most elite data center operators in the world too. So it's got to be a pretty cool story. And I'm glad that you shared it with us.
Appreciate it.
On a personal note, I mean, Databank has done so much for veterans. We wouldn't be the company we were without what Databank has done. And I'm saying this, you didn't know any of this before we talked. You probably didn't even know that our companies had worked together in the past, and we have a healthy relationship. The Databank team has done a lot to hire transitioning veterans. And that's the most important part of what our job is, to help veterans get more jobs. So
it's great.
I thank you. I thank you for your time personally as well. Sorry, I was a couple minutes late coming in first.
That's all right.
But thank you for joining the revolution, and thank you for everything that Databank does for
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Excellent.
All right.